I know we get a lot of emails. We send you a lot of emails. And we know you read every word of every email that we send you. And about 8 months ago, we sent you some emails about a conference in Washington, D.C. That was the first attempt for the reform movement to get together since the pandemic in any major way. Many of you may have been to a URJ biennial before where they, if you can imagine, they brought together 5,000 people under one roof in one room where they all coughed at the same time. Came home with all of each other's germs, but didn't think about any of that. And so conferences like this are hard to pull together today. Mm-hmm. It's taken a few tries, and this was the first time they were able to pull it together. And so Jocelyn reached out when she saw that there was a particular cohort for Jews of color, and she said, I think I'm going to go. And so she did. So thank you, first of all, for reading our emails. And,
You're welcome.
And for using your resources, your time, your money, your effort, and your ability to listen and learn and teach to represent us, but also to go to that conference in D.C. and to bring some of what you learned back. So we're going to take a few minutes tonight to learn from you.
It was my pleasure.
Yes. So tell us first, why'd you want to go, and what was it like to?
So you had made a statement just now when you were talking about how, as a mixed multitude, when we were standing at Sinai, it all looked, very different. And you've said this before, so I don't feel weird saying it, but the people in the Torah were not white people.
Yeah.
They weren't. So I take any opportunity that I have to, I love every single one of you, I do. I just want to make sure that I preface that with that, because that's important. But I take every opportunity that I have to interact with groups that look most likely like how we would have looked when we were all standing at the foot as a mixed multitude, right? Because that's what we were. Am I looking at them? Or?
You look at them. Look at
okay.
them. You've seen me before.
All right.
So what was it like? So what was it like being in the cohort? Explain the cohort.
So the cohort itself is coordinated by a woman of color who actually works at the URJ in the diversity. They call it inclusion, belonging, and diversity. And her name is Yolanda Savage Narva. If she's watching, hi Yolanda. But she was actually the one to reach out to me and ask me if I wanted to come because I had been on a previous person of color Zoom call. But it was her job to coordinate the cohort and bring in speakers and things like that. So from that, we were all together in different groups, hearing from different speakers for a multitude of different reasons.
So you and I have talked about this. What were some of the speakers?
So we were actually addressed by the senior rabbi of the Reform movement, Rick Jacobs, at one point, like all ourselves together as a group, so that was exciting. Hannah Bronfman, who is also a wellness influencer. I'm not a teenager, so I don't get into skincare discussions, but she's apparently a very popular skincare influencer, and she was also available for that, as well as one of the representatives from the Jewish agency. Her name is Panina Aganyahu. She's an Ethiopian Jewish woman who resides in Israel currently, and she was part of the discussion as well, but we'll get into that.
Well, tell us a little bit about it. Let's.
Do you want to get into that right now?
Get into it right. Yeah. Tell
All right,
us.
let's get right into it.
Tell us a little bit about her story. Didn't she?
So Panina is from Ethiopia, originally, and actually walked from Ethiopia through Sudan to get to the camp in order to be aliyad to Israel. Her family was aliyad when she was 4 at the time, back in the 70s or 80s. And she had a lot to say about the purpose of bringing Ethiopian Jews to Israel was to give them life rather than the purpose of obviously bringing black women and men to the Americas 400 years ago was for enslavement. So she has a lot of gratitude toward her own country because of that, and while also dealing with what we're all dealing with in a post-October 7th world. I don't know, did you want me to get into that now?
No, save that for a minute. So
okay.
Let's first talk, I think something that I would have a hard time understanding is if I was a minority within my own congregation.
Right.
And then I walked into a room where all of a sudden that wasn't the case, which is, I imagine, what it might have felt like for you to walk
sure.
into a room that's already been defined as a room
a
for
safe
Jews
space,
of color,
right?
right? I mean,
Right.
it's what did that feel like for you, and what does that mean to you to have that space created for
It
you?
means a lot to have certain subtexts that generally have to be communicated to other humans not have to be communicated. So you might have these feelings, for example, as growing up, maybe you went to a Jewish summer camp, and it's an exciting time to have everybody be Jewish and not having to explain what being Jewish is like, right? So imagine not having to explain what being black is like to people who are also Jewish, and it's literally that amazing.
Yeah. So let's talk now. Let's step in a little bit
All right,
to
ready?
the post October 7th world, because
Okay.
I think those two things connect, which is for us as the general Jewish community, all of us, meaning we, I think, even if we have different opinions on and different places in which we relate to Israel or how we feel about the October 7th, I think we understand, we have a shared understanding of what it meant as a Jewish person to experience October 7th and the anti-Semitism and the hate and the fear that went along with it. As a person of color, though, it's a little more complicated sometimes when we talk about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, because it's often framed in terms of an American racial lens.
Right.
So can you explain a little bit about how that came up and educate us a little bit? What are we talking about here? How do you hear it differently, or how might
I hear it differently than you do?
Yes.
Okay. So, I want to preface this by saying I think it's very important to hold in dynamic tension both Palestinian and Jewish pain together. I know it's very hard to do that in some spaces, but I'm coming at you from a place of, I'm a type of person who does both of those things together, and I think we all need to make the mental leap to make sure that we're doing that. But also, often I think that it's easiest for people to understand things through the lens of things that they already know. So a lot of times, as a white person, you might automatically look at this conflict and say, okay, it is very similar to what black people experienced in the civil rights movement. These people are white passing Jews, therefore it is very easy to just paint this as oppressor versus the oppressed, and very obviously, oh no, that's bad. Palestine, good. Israel is bad, and that's easy. But something that I like for people to focus on is not making it that easy, because it's not. In all honesty, though, I think that the black struggle and the Palestinian struggle, while I do hold space for their pain, I find it just a tad small bit insulting to have our struggle compared to that, particularly when it comes to framing, let me phrase this carefully, framing resistance by any means necessary to be similar to the black struggle, and also with resistance being tied to rape and sexual assault and beheading of humans.
So let me clarify. So you're saying what a comparison that is sometimes either explicitly shared,
Correct,
or sometimes just implied,
yes,
is that you can't fault an oppressed people,
correct,
for resisting, because you wouldn't fault African Americans for resisting during the
Right.
civil rights movement. Therefore, the Palestinian narrative is similar to the African American narrative over
Correct.
the last 75 years.
Uh-huh.
And on the one hand, sometimes we might say as a Jewish community, well, that's just not true, or that's not how we see it. What you're saying is there's actually some offense in that.
Correct.
To make that analogy is actually
Offensive to me
offensive
personally, yeah.
to the black narrative in America.
I find it, now, I do want to give the caveat that when you've spoken to one black person, you've literally spoken to one black person. I do not speak for every single black person on planet Earth. I cannot do that. But for me personally, I find it to be insulting to have my narrative sort of co-opted by people who are they're struggling, of course, but also particularly by terror in particular. Not conflating Palestinians with terrorists, because they are not. But I challenge anyone to find in my personal history of my people someone who has raped and pillaged to get what they wanted. We haven't done that. So I challenge people.
Or if it has happened, it hasn't been held up as an
a
acceptable form of resistance,
right? No,
Right.
it's not. It's actually categorically condemned. So I would like to impress upon people to do the mental labor of separating these two struggles and not falling into the lazy activism of putting those two things together. And again, also making sure that we're holding space for Palestinian pain, because I do think that it's valuable to criticize or critique Israel. However, I don't think that that should be done at the expense of black people and black lives.
We didn't prepare this question in advance, but I'm thinking of it now. But so what was the interaction like with the rest of the conference? So there was this cohort of Jews of color. What was the interaction like with everyone else? Was there?
It was good. I think that meeting different clergy from different congregations really opens your eyes to the different, the diversity, not just racial or ethnic diversity, but also the diversity of locations, types of communities. Like there are communities in which people are traveling like 2 hours one way to get to one shul because there's one shul in one town, and what working with a congregation like that is like, and sort of those different struggles, particularly looking at like women rabbis and what woman rabbi struggles are. It's just a whole new world of things. And again, like I said, I love you guys, but you know, we live in our very small bubble, and it's nice to get out.
So last question, which I want you to expound on as much as you can, is
Okay, great.
so we're celebrating Black History Month. And we're trying to intentionally focus on, I think ultimately the reason that we have Black History Month and the reason that we take these moments to celebrate Black history is because we're trying to highlight something that's often overlooked or ignored.
Right.
It's not to try to put all of Black history into one month so that the other 11 months we ignore it. It's in fact because too often the default is that it doesn't get highlighted, and we're trying to sort of jumpstart our engines so that the rest, the 11 months that follow, we will remember these points along the way.
Right.
So I say that as a setup to say, so what is it, since this is our moment to sort of grasp some wisdom and energy from you in this moment, going forward for the 11 months that follow.
That's a tall order.
That's a tall order. But what is it that the typical Ashkenazi Jewish community in America that's mostly Caucasian needs to maybe learn about the Black Jewish experience? What would be your advice for us, the do's and the do-nots?
Okay. All right, so I heard a piece of advice from one of the diversity or inclusion leaders at the URJ event, and it bristled me a lot, but when I really thought about it, it made perfect sense. You are, and I want to make sure I'm very clear about this, you might want to write this down, your congregation is only as inclusive and welcoming as the most racist person that walks through your doors. Now, I don't want to name anybody. I don't know everybody who goes here, but I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to think about somebody you know who might be racist. I don't know who that is, but now picture that the inclusivity of your shul and your shul community rests on that person. Does that feel good? Probably not, right? So where I would probably go with that is, I always think back to the time of post-George Floyd America, where everybody was so interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they wanted to learn, and they were just so eager to figure things out. All right, I hate to burst your bubble. Learning is so good, and we are people of the book, and that's what we're supposed to do. But that was 4 years ago. We have all read a lot of things. It is now time to be doing the things. And I think it's hard for people to figure out. I think DEI has become kind of like a buzzword to know, like, what does that even mean? What does DEI mean? So I'm going to try to explain that in the most simple terms possible. So diversity is when you hold a dinner party and you're happy that a certain number of black people showed up. You can count them. That's great. That's diversity. Okay. Equity is making sure that everybody of every different color has access to the same food at the party. That's another level, right? Now we were beyond just counting people. Now we're making sure that everybody has what they need. Inclusion, or in the belonging aspect, is has everybody's voice been heard in the planning of this meal, right? So we've not only just brought people to the table, but they are kind of leading and doing the work, if that makes sense. So with that in mind, I think that the next step for most people beyond learning is to check and credit your own biases, figure out what your biases are against different types of people and work on unpacking those, because it's going to make you uncomfortable, but you don't get past that, oh look, there's black people here, we can pat ourselves on the back because they're here, without advancing to those other levels and start asking the question of, if they're not here, why aren't they here, and what can we do to make that happen? I do want to plug some programming from URJ in their READY program, which is Ready for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. They have specific webinars that are like a couple times a month, and they're good for people who are interfacing with new people on different levels, particularly related to things like microaggressions, personal and implicit bias, and things like that. I would recommend that every single person who interfaces with visitors or anybody who comes through these doors take a workshop, please. Like, your life depends on it. I don't mean to be like scare tactic lady right now, but I was at the conference with a woman of color who goes to a very large shul in a very large Midwestern city that a lot of people go to, and a lot of people might have heard of it. But she was presumed as a congregant of color with a doctorate degree, mind you, to be part of the cleaning crew by a greeter. Right? Right. And I'm hearing you and you're all gasping and it sounds so terrible. But, and I don't want to use scare tactics, but I think it's important for you to know that it could happen here. I think we take for granted the fact that you've seen and you know most people, but during high holidays, sometimes you don't. And obviously, you want everybody who comes in the doors to have good interactions, correct? So, because if you have a bad interaction with someone as a black person, not only are you never coming back, but you're also going to tell like 12 other black people who are then going to tell 12 more black people. And then now the entire community knows that you think that black people are part of cleaning crews all the time. And like, I'm not even, like, that's just, it's funny, haha, but also funny in an uh-oh kind of way, because we don't want that, right? As a klal or as a group of, Jewish people, we want our multitudes to be as mixed as the multitudes that we stood under as a group at the mountain. So I say that to say, if you've been reading, good, but now it's time to take the next step.
Great advice. And first, I'm going to just highlight. I think your first comment about that congregations are only as welcoming as their most racist person is a great. It's a reminder that we can get it right 99% of the time, and one, as is true in lots of areas for lots of us, and this does not just pertain to race. A lot of us have experienced this in other ways. In our own personal life, whatever our story is, in a synagogue, you walk into a synagogue and you feel shame for whatever reason, and chances are you won't walk into that synagogue again. And it only takes one person to intentionally or unintentionally shame you. Mm-hmm. So it's something to be very aware of. The last thing is can you tell us some things that people say like that? Because I think just real quick advice on, here are things that sometimes people say, perhaps meaning well, but they aren't heard well by especially people of color. Because I've heard from you and others, there are certain things that perhaps are intended to be friendly questions, but
There's a couple of those.
but when you are a person of color and you continually receive these questions, it's clear that they're microaggressions in a way. So
Right. And I am going to like gently correct the term microaggressions
Thank you.
because in the past couple of years, I've been kind of knocking out the term microaggression and just calling it what it is. It's not a microaggression because it's not very small. It's actually a macro large aggression, and it's racist. So that's a little vocabulary change for myself. And then another point that I want to make before I get into this is a lot of times people will say, well, I meant well and I didn't mean any harm. Your impact is always going to matter more than your intentions. Like, write that down, put it on a sticky note, whatever you need. Because it doesn't really matter what you meant once it comes out of your mouth, and you don't get to determine whether it's offensive or not. But in the realm of maximum aggression and racism, a lot of times there's a lot of assumption that's made about where a black person comes from. For example, the assumption of when I would come into a, not particularly in this space, but in other larger Jewish spaces, particularly where I don't live, it's often, so what's your story? Or how did you become Jewish? The assumption that I have become Jewish from the outside of Judaism in itself, or that I have a story, is interesting because would you say that to this person or any of these people in the front row? The assumption is that they were born Jewish, but the assumption is generally that I've come at it from the outside. And that's no shade against converts, obviously, because I am one. But I've met people who are born Jewish who look like me, and they find it to be very kind of insulting that people always assume that you have a story. So just assume that the person is Jewish and that they don't have one. Additional, in my own personal, not favorite, but like least favorite, is, wow, you're really well spoken. Which, like, it seems that it's a really cool compliment, right? But like, that always leads to the question of, as opposed to what exactly? And like, I hate to be the one to bring that, because then it becomes like, oh no, now my feelings are hurt. But I always ask people, as opposed to what? Because I'm really curious as to what sort of person or am I being compared to. So all of that to say, assumptions are bad, and just get to know people and understand that when you've met one, and that's pretty much it.
That's great.
Is that?
That's perfect.
That's it?
So thank you for sharing your journey, your learning, and this is not the first time that you've been our teacher, and it won't be the last time that you're our teacher, I imagine, because we've loved learning with you, and we look forward to how your journey is going to continue to help us
Thanks.
travel with you. So thank you for going to the conference, and thank you for sharing.
No problem.